Welcome in. This is another episode of ACC Baseball Etc, but it is also another episode of Highway to Hoover. As Joe Healy and Mark Etheridge are with me, I'm Daron Vaught. Both shows are presented, as always, by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. You can go to pitchlogic.com for more information. This is this is great. I think I don't know how this is going to go, guys, but I'm looking forward to this. This should be fun. Big fan. Hi, I listen all the time to Highway to Hoover.
Same here. First time, long time. Yeah.
Joe and I are going to gang up on you. Just get ready.
That's right. Well, Gravy's going to run in halfway through with a steel chair to save Daron.
I can always count on Joe to meet my wrestling references with more wrestling references.
Yeah.
I started to say people expected probably when we got 4 ACC and 4 SEC to Omaha that this would be more of a tag team match, Gravy and me against the two of you. We're creating a faction. So when Gravy comes in, he's going to be playing the air guitar on his title belt.
Yeah.
And he's going to be Hollywood Hogan. So
that's right.
We shocked everybody with
well
this.
Done. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
So because we have a split ACC SEC College World Series, we thought it would be a good idea to come on here and as a group talk through the matchups, talk through the Omaha 8, and just do it in a little bit different way than we normally do, with Gravy and me stumping for the ACC guys and you two being fair and journalistic as you always are.
That's right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's it.
All right, perfect. And for those watching, I'm just going to, because I have no other way to do this or no other idea of how to do this. We're just gonna continually switch up the branding here. Oh, you guys have handles on yours.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, we got real production value.
Yeah,
it just means more.
That's okay. That's all right. People know. My at the beginning of mine.
Yours is simple enough. Yeah. You and Mark got lucky in that regard. Me, not so much. There's some other Joe Healy out there kicking around. I wasn't able to get that.
We hate that guy.
Yeah, he's the worst.
He probably gets so much spam from haters.
That's right.
There.
So many angry emails he doesn't understand.
Yeah, mostly
all right,
from
so
LSU
before
fans.
we get into the baseball, Mark, I've got to express how envious I am of that massive plant behind you.
Yeah, there's a story there. So my grandfather, who I was really close to, he passed away 10 years ago. And this was one of the lilies from his funeral. And I got it. And somehow I have kept it alive through moves, through relocating it all through the house internally. And it is thriving, right? It is kicking ass. And I'm so happy because I kind of have a part of him with me. So he's looking over my shoulder, telling me, hey, that's stupid. Don't say that. But I'd say it anyway. But that's kind of the, it's kind of a piece of him, right, that I've got. And it's right here with me all the time.
I was going to joke about my just killing plants constantly, and you turned it into something very nice and very sweet. Well done, Mark.
Yeah, wholesome. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Well, I've got you guys probably see, and loyal watchers here on YouTube and other platforms understand, because you probably recognize there's not a plant in this thing behind me anymore. That was a pothos. I killed it in 6 months. There was a parlor palm right behind me on my set up here too, killed that too, right around 6 months. Those are supposed to be easy ones. So I'm envious in that you've got now, of course, because it's got a great story with it too, but you are able to have a great houseplant. I would like to water a houseplant person.
And you have to give them sunlight. Those are two important things.
So one day, maybe I will be able to cultivate being a houseplant guy. We're just not there yet.
I think there's a lesson there, though. It's Daron got some houseplants and is kind of very conscientiously tried to keep them alive and cares about them. And Mark's just kind of well, yeah, this will probably die pretty, and hasn't necessarily felt like the best plant owner, and yet it's thriving. There's probably a lesson there about just, some things in life just, are either meant to be, aren't meant to be. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. Okay, should we dig in? College World Series?
Let's do it.
That's happening this week, Omaha.
It is.
Let me start with this. Gravy and I sort of tossed around this question when it was a possibility. I'm curious what the two of you think. All ACC, all SEC, regardless of the split, right? It just so happens to be even at 4-4.
Mm-hmm.
A 2-conference College World Series. Do we believe that is either good or bad for college baseball in any direction?
I think it's neutral because I think it's mostly just a quirk of the way the bracket fell, right? Yeah. There's a scenario where Oregon plays, pick another team from another conference, and we're guaranteed someone outside of the conferences, right? Like, so I think it is mostly just a quirk that means nothing. But I will say, if you made me pick and you said, no, Joe, this is a binary, this is ESPN First Take, you got to pick a side.
Right.
I'm going probably on not being a great thing because I don't think it's a signal of a healthy ecosystem. Now, I don't necessarily look at that as the fault of any specific thing. I just think that college sports is not a healthy ecosystem. I don't think anyone would argue otherwise at this point. So I just think that's all it is, I think. It's just a symptom of an unhealthy ecosystem that we're kind of all muddling through and trying to find our way. And maybe 7-10 years down the line, we'll kind of have things a little more sorted. But until then, I think this kind of thing is going to continue happening, especially as these conferences get even bigger.
Yeah. One thought I had is, all of the top 8 seeds were in these 2 conferences. So we had almost chalk anyway. I mean, Arkansas, but then, it was a whole, and Clemson ended up losing in the supers, but it was a whole lot of chalk. So the best teams made it, which, in our sport doesn't always happen. I kind of like that part. I want to see the best teams play for the title. But it is kind of cool to have some underdog, once in a while as well. But as you look at where the sport is moving to, the power is being consolidated into the top programs. And many of those programs are in these 2 leagues. With the transfer portal, with NIL, this isn't going away. This is going to continue to funnel the top players from the mid-majors, from, other places, lower divisions. All of those are going to want to come into these top programs. Now, they all can't come here, but it does create an imbalance, and I think that's what we're seeing. And honestly, I don't think that's going away. I think, if anything, it's going to continue to grow. And is that healthy? No, it's not healthy, but it's also kind of survival of the fittest, and that's kind of sports should be a meritocracy, and I think that's what we're seeing at this point, like it or not.
Yeah, I will say I do like that. Even though it is sort of chalky, we've got the stories that we do. Kentucky's in its first College World Series ever. Florida State is back after not even making the ACC tournament a season ago.
Right.
Florida, even though they're the 3 seed in this,
great story. Yeah,
was preseason number 2. These are great stories. NC State has this best year in NC State athletics history going on because both their men's and women's basketball teams made their respective Final Fours. There's a lot here. So it doesn't feel like, it's factual to say it's pretty close to chalk, but it doesn't do it justice to say it that way.
Yeah. There's plenty of stories. And what about Tennessee, the top overall seed? The top overall seed hadn't won it since 99 when Miami did it, right? So is this the year? They've been the best team at least the last quarter of the season. And, what happens there? I love the whole Florida storyline. Florida's a team, they believe right now. And when you have that belief and you have the best player left in the tournament, that gives you some pretty good power there as you head into this. So especially, they draw A&M and they're kind of banged up right now. So that's a fun matchup. And I'll tell you this story and then you can move on. But I saw Florida and Texas A&M play in Gainesville early in the year. It was a really close matchup. best 2 out of 3. Florida won the rubber game. And I told the media in the right after we got through with the press conference, these teams are going to play again in Omaha. And that did not look like a really good prediction about a month ago. But Florida's figured it out, right? And they were able to make it. And both those teams did, that they are in Omaha, and they're going to play in the first round. And it's just a really kind of compelling story how you can see a team early in the year and you see the ability, but there was just something missing in the course of the year, and they find it. Sully stays the course, as he says, and he's able to find it at the end of the year. And now, I mean, they're hot. Who's going to pick them right? And who's going to be surprised, really, if they go on and they continue this run even further?
Yeah, it's funny. At the regional in Chapel Hill, I ran into former North Carolina head coach Mike Fox, and he geeks out on this stuff. He loves it, right? So we're talking about the bracket, the draws, and what are North Carolina's chances? And he said to me then, he's like, watch out for Florida. And we had this conversation where he just, and this is the guy who's done it and been there, so of course I'm enthralled.
Incredible source.
Yeah, very good source. And he just said, look, these guys have been fighting for their season for a month and a half before North Carolina or any other team really tightened down everything and started playing for something again. And there's a lot to be said for that. So they just kind of entered the postseason in this mode where they were playing with a postseason type urgency. And I think that's what's been a huge part of carrying them through.
Yeah. You mentioned, Daron, North Carolina, and that's a team I want to talk about, because when I see them and see how they've been the last couple of weeks, I mean, they could have easily lost to Long Island, and then they had the dramatic win at the end, then played, 3 incredible games with LSU. They came out, winning 2 of those, and then they move on and play, great games against West Virginia that really could have, things go different, could have gone either way. And so going to be able to pull through, kind of like what we talked about with Florida. And they also have a dude. I mean, who's playing better than Vance Honeycutt right now? I mean, he is just on fire. Do you see them a whole lot more than we do? Do you see them as a team that is kind of got that, figured it out, so to speak, and is on that upward trend?
Yeah, they've been an interesting program, I'll say, since, it's funny, I just mentioned Mike Fox. Since Mike Fox handed over the reins to Scott Forbes, that it's been kind of an interesting program to me. Thank you, Joe. In that Fox had built up some equity with the fan base. People love Scott Forbes. He is through and through a North Carolina guy. But if you begin a coaching tenure and you do not do the things that ultimately the people want the team to do, they're not going to be as favorable towards you as they are Mike Fox. And I'm not saying it got anywhere near, fire Forbes chants or tweets or whatever. But there has been some skepticism in that, again, this is their first College World Series since 2018. And he's had the keys to the car for a handful of years now, and it hasn't happened. That said, I just bring that up to mean that the Bosch in particular, like home games for North Carolina this year, have felt different. I had a friend who's an alum who hasn't been to a game all year ask me, and they said they're jealous of, I was at the regional and at the super regional just to be there to witness it. And
it looked great on TV. Yeah.
I was explaining the same thing to them. It's just like, okay, the place is always packed. People who go to those games know baseball. But there's something about LSU coming to town, I think, lit a fire with them in a way that, I mean, it's as ignited a fan base as I've ever seen. And obviously they're done at the Bosch this year, but it changed. And I think the caliber of the team is one thing. And again, you had that LSU crowd there, which made a pretty good dent in the crowd at the Bosch. I mean, they were well represented. You guys know LSU travels.
Familiar, yeah.
So that's been an interesting element to it. In terms of them figuring it out, one of the big criticisms of the Forbes era has been the pitching. And, you know, they lost Robert Woodard because he's a head coach at Charlotte now. Bryant Gaines has come in and you know, they just hadn't to this point really seemed to have the dudes that they normally do. They've got good pitchers, just not great pitchers. Well, then you look at this season, they lose their Friday ace before the season even starts. And I think the consensus feeling amongst the fan base was, oh no, here we go again.
Yeah.
Like we finally had somebody and we lost them. So then you bump up 2 true freshmen to the Friday, Saturday roles. You lose another Friday starter when Folger Boaz gets hurt. And your de facto 1 and 2 guys in your rotation, second team all ACC, Jason DeCaro and Chase Sprague. So it's just the depth has been there this year in a way that you almost, as somebody around the program, like you almost kept waiting for it to fall off. And it never did. And the bullpen has had its years where it's been up and down too. And it was almost the same for that. Matthew Mateus and Dalton Pence have been 2 of the most utilized relievers in the entire country. So it's like, okay, when's it going to turn even just a little bit the other way? And it hasn't. And then you mentioned this, like, how great is it when your stars deliver in the big moments, right?
Yeah.
It's cool when Gavin Gallagher does it as a freshman, a walk-off grand slam in the regional. But for Vance Honeycutt to hit a walk-off home run one night against West Virginia, he leads off with a home run the next, and then his next plate appearance lays down a bunt and runs it out for a single. And he himself generates both of the runs that they score in that game. He's taking games over. He is the perfect symbol of how dynamic that lineup can be. And man, like, again, the feeling is, they've got it figured out. It honestly, like, it might be them in Tennessee. And that's basically your matchup of the best 2 teams right now. That's kind of generalizing what I'm feeling around it.
Well, and unfortunately, I think for viewers, they're in the same side of the bracket, which, you know, I think people are looking at those 2 teams as, hey, like in a perfect world, those are your 2 teams standing. That brings me to a question now that I would like to pose to the group. And that's when we look at the 4 opening round games, which stands out to you as the one, which one stands out to you and why? Because I will throw into the ring Kentucky and NC State. Because first of all, this whole bracket is not in the North Carolina, Tennessee side of the bracket. So there's just opportunity in this side of the bracket, right, to get to the finals. But I'm looking at it as, look, Kentucky and NC State, NC State was in Omaha a few years ago, but it's pretty much a different roster. Shout out to Sam Heifel. But, for the most part, different roster. Kentucky's never been here. And we know it takes time to get your sea legs under you in an Omaha situation. It's weird. You don't play in stadiums this big in front of 28,000. Not even LSU plays in front of 20 some odd thousand people, right? So it's different. The sight lines are different. The moment is bigger. There's just a lot of things different. So it might take some time. So I'm looking at Kentucky and NC State as 2 teams that would benefit from playing each other in that way. And then let's say you win that, whatever team wins it, you're in a situation where you're going to be facing either Texas A&M with someone other than Ryan Prager on the mound, or Florida with someone other than Liam Peterson on the mound. And he's been really good for them lately, save for the super regional, but that was, that happens. So I think there's an opportunity there for the winner of that Kentucky NC State game to face a team without their best guy, for a couple of teams that have some drop-offs pitching wise after the first day of games. And then obviously you get to 2-0 on your side of the bracket and you're sitting pretty. So I just think that game strikes me as 2 teams that could use a quick start and might have the opportunity to get one based on the way the bracket broke.
That's why we have you here. So I'll go next. I think the most compelling for me is Florida State and Tennessee. And the reason I say that, Tennessee, they're the best lineup in the sport. I don't even think there's any conversation otherwise, right? They hit runs, and I think they'll hit home runs even in the Chuck, right? They're going to do that. It's a deep lineup. They have guys off the bench they can bring in, and they're facing what I would think is the best pitcher left, Jamie Arnold, right? Is there a better one? He's certainly at the top of my list right now. And that's the first round matchup. That's Friday night, and that's going to be under the lights, and everybody's off work, and they're tuning into the College World Series. You're going to see the number one team face the number one pitcher, and for me, that's really key, because if you're Tennessee and you're going to lose, it's going to be because somebody just figures you out and is able to deal, and you're not able to shut down the opposition, because Florida State can swing it too. Right. So I do think that's where Tennessee is vulnerable. I think that as teams get deeper into their staff, Tennessee's going to feast. They're just unrelenting, but they're vulnerable against the top guys. And for me, that's a really critical game to kick this thing off.
Yeah, that's the one I had circled too. Especially you get into this regional style double elimination with these four team sides of the bracket here. That first game goes a long way. And yeah, you can say Tennessee would, I think, pretty easily be able to bounce back and mash in the other games and just outscore opponents. But yeah, no, Jamie Arnold versus that lineup. I mean, he's the guy capable who is left of shutting them down.
Right.
And Florida State can get, a big fly here or there. I mean, we might be looking at like a 3-2 game.
Right.
Like that's compelling. And again, that's the first big step for one of those two. Not that it can't be undone with playing out of the losers bracket, but no, that's the one I had circled too, Mark. I think that one. That's big.
Neither of those teams, if you lose that first game, I mean, nobody's really built to come out of the losers bracket. Let's be honest, right? But those
Arkansas
two teams, right? Arkansas might have been the one team where you're like, well, the best version of Arkansas. But with these two, Florida State has the injury issues they've dealt with. They're not as deep as they were. I mean, Daron, you can jump in if you disagree there, but generally speaking, it's my understanding that they're just not the best version of themselves, just because of some health issues. And with Tennessee, they've got a pretty narrow path. Like they go opener Chris Stamos with AJ Causey behind him, and Causey's been excellent, better than his numbers, his ERA at least would suggest. But if it doesn't work with Causey, and there on occasion, like he'll get hit a little, he doesn't get beat up, but if they have to use someone else in that game, it starts to get them off schedule a little bit. And if you lose, now you got Drew Beam, but now you've probably burned a bullpen guy you didn't want to use. And so it just starts to stack up on them a little bit. And again, that's true of pretty much everybody here, but neither of those teams strike me as the ideal fit. Offensively, sure, but pitching wise, neither of them I would feel great about coming back through.
Yeah. And you mentioned Florida State, Carson Dorsey has had some really good outings as of lately, but that's as of late. At some point, maybe he becomes what he's been most of the season again. It's just less certain, right? And maybe if things happen differently, we're talking about a 2 ace type of Florida State team where they've got Cam Leiter there as well to help with that climbing back out of a loser's bracket. But you're right, like no one has that. And sticking to that side of the bracket, like maybe the consistency of North Carolina makes them capable of doing that. The bullpen certainly helps. I mentioned their number 2 starter is Shea Sprague, who exactly what you're getting every time he pitches.
Great fit for the ballpark.
That too. Yeah.
Like he's going to give up some contact, but it's going to have to be harder than average contact to get out of there. And, you've got Vance Honeycutt running around the outfield. He's going to get to most everything. So, he can afford to make a few mistakes, which, with Sprague's stuff, if he makes mistakes, they do get hit. But that's the thing is he minimizes that and the defense helps make up for some of it.
I'd have to look and see. This is just a number on Sprague that has kept me interested in him all year. Leadoff batters for an inning at one point we're hitting well above 400 off of him, and he still kept a pretty good ERA. And part of that was he got a lot of ground balls into double plays. Yeah. I think it was 423 even as recently as like Mother's Day. I did a game and noticed that. And I talked to Forbes about it, and he was just like, well, yeah, we got to get that number down. But, thankfully he's done pretty okay. Yeah. Like that's that side of the bracket is, I mean, I kind of like that we've got 3-1 and then 3-1 on both sides. It feels like, and this is, to me, this is the right way for it to pan out. I would like an ACC and an SEC in the final.
I think I would too. Just for I would,
for the fun of it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are bragging rights at stake here. I mean, and not just with us, right? But with the world at large. People in China are probably wondering about this too.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that, the SEC is, I mean, there's a lot of SEC fatigue out there. People just pulling against them, just tired of them winning, so many of these things. Well, now the ACC is going to join that neighborhood too, right? Because people hate winners. And if a certain group of teams start winning more than their share, then, I mean, the arrows go that way too. So I do think that it's these two leagues have demonstrated that they are a level above the rest. Now, the Big 12 is not that far behind, but they are behind. And then there's a pretty sizable gap, right? And with the Pac-12 going away, I mean, where does that land? Does the Big 10 elevate? Does the Sun Belt seize their opportunity and move into that number spot? Maybe, but I do think at the top, it's not that, say an ACC team wins the whole thing this year. It doesn't kind of surpass them, but it does kind of get that conversation going where it's not just about, it just means more and all this stuff. It's actually, it's more of a competition where before it was just kind of the SEC and everyone else.
In terms of backdrops, it certainly is.
Yeah.
Good timing.
Mark says people hate winners, and I have in my life I've found that to be true. I got a lot of haters, that's for sure.
Yeah,
same. Don't we all? Right? All of us here. Exactly. Anyway, you talked a little bit about it with the Kentucky NC State matchup. Just sort of it's not that the Tennessee side is unpredictable, or it's not that it's predictable, because I think those are going to be some fun games, and that will be awesome baseball. I think we're in for the same in a different way on the other side of the bracket. And it's kind of partially because of the unpredictability of A&M with injury. So maybe this is the question I'm trying to ask. I love Braden Montgomery, huge fan of that guy. So disappointed, like I think anyone who loves college baseball was, to see him go down with injury. Like they are dangerous without him, right? Like to what degree does that hamstring them?
Well, it certainly takes that one swing guy, or one of the one swing guys, out of the lineup. I mean, we've talked about how good the top of that lineup is with Krahovic, Laviolette, and Montgomery, and now there's only two of them. But they do have the lineup has depth, and I think it started around mid-season. They moved the lineup around a little bit, brought some new guys in, and it's a really strong lineup. I'm actually more worried about Shane Sadeo, who was their number 2 starter, left in the first inning. They said there's no structural damage. Hopefully he can return, but I mean, how do you even know what to expect, right, under those conditions? He's their number 2 guy. And they really don't have a true number 3, I guess it would be Tanner Jones, but I think what they would do, or he hadn't been great down the stretch either. Well, so I think what would happen is Chris Cortez, who's been absolutely lights out in relief, and a lot of times long relief, I think you would, especially if you lose the first game, you would just burn your bullet and throw him right away, and try to get off to a good start and let your offense deal it, and let Ashenbach finish it, right? So, but it's all of those things that wouldn't be there if Sadeo's healthy, and if Montgomery's healthy, then you have an even better chance of just winning by pounding people, right? Which they've done a lot this year against some pretty good teams. So it's just really is unfortunate that you fight all this way and you have no little, group time to regroup really and kind of find yourself. Florida lost 3 starters, but they've had a few weeks to kind of get back and understand, who's going to take those places, right? And who's going to elevate. And A&M's not going to get that opportunity at all.
Which, Joe, brings me to my next question. How many pitches is Brandon Neely going to throw?
As many as he needs to.
What do we set the over-under at?
I'm going to average it. I'm actually going to do it per appearance. I'm going to set the over-under at like 53.5 per appearance. Okay. Because I think there's a scenario where, especially if they lose the opener, he's pitching in the opener. You could take that to the bank.
Yeah.
Because
for
whether
Florida, by the way, for Florida, we will have some ACC specific listeners, and I'm not 100% sure that they know. Who
sure.
We're helping them preview Brandon Healy of Florida. Yeah.
He's 100%. The Florida closer. He also started on Fridays for a lot of the year. So he's stretched out, but still they used him a lot in the Super Regionals.
Yeah. And that's the thing is whether they need a reliever in the 3rd or the 8th, he's probably the guy because he can give you 5 innings. He can also, be the guy who, hey, we need the last 6 outs, go get him. I mean, he's their answer to that question regardless. So we will see him. But if they end up in the loser side of it, we might see him every day until they get to the end of it. And honestly, in the Clemson Super, that second day he wasn't as sharp. He pitched, he threw at 50 some odd pitches, and then the next day came back and threw more than that. He obviously wasn't as sharp the second day. How could he have been? But he wasn't bad. He was still doing a pretty nice job. So he does have the bounce back ability to do that. In a perfect world, they'd be able to skip him, but we'll see. This is Omaha. So, it's kind of all hands on deck every game. So quick on pitching, Daron. Oh, Mark, go ahead.
I was just going to say, early on, you get the day off between games. So that would help.
That helps. Yeah.
Availability.
I was going to ask you, Daron, speaking of pitching on Virginia, I have long thought they didn't have enough pitching to win a national title. Should I think differently?
We always do. That's just it. Look, Evan Blanco's been, I think, their most consistent starter all season long. It's taken the entire season for Jay Woolfolk to assume the role that we all thought he would have. But his last 2 starts in particular have been awesome. And look, if Joe Savino is your 3rd guy, that's pretty good. If you are a team that scores 10 plus runs per game and has enough in the tank in the bullpen, which is arguable, but maybe they do. It's just, man, it's wild how they do this to us. Brian O'Connor, every single year, it feels like in the past several, it's I don't know. Do they have the pitching? Do they have the pitching? And here they are again. So it's obviously been enough to get them here. They do score a lot of runs. They hit. We talk about the dynamic nature of Tennessee's offense and North Carolina's and Virginia. Offensively, it feels because of teams like those has been maybe a little bit overlooked this season. God, Ethan Anderson for them is a guy I sincerely thought he had ACC Player of the Year potential coming into the season, and it's been a down year by maybe what his best could be. But most nights they've got him 7th in the order. He's down in the back half of the batting order, and that's scary.
With a 950 OPS.
Yeah, you're right. Down year, 950 OPS, 7 hitter. It's just, I think so. I think to answer your question, I think they do have enough. Now, all these teams have enough to some degree or another, and it's a matter of executing and letting the games play out. But no, I don't think there are red flags with Virginia at this point. I mean, I think they're just as capable as anybody else there.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating too that you look at the pitchers that have had success. Evan Blanco's had a really nice year, like you mentioned, and then Joe Savino. But then you look at Chase Hungate and Angelo Tonas. I mean, before the season, if you said, Joe, pick out the 4 or 5 guys you think have the most impact here, like maybe I would have thrown one of those guys in the mix, but I would have been like, okay, Woolfolk, who has come on, but it wasn't always great this year. Jack O'Connor, Cullen McKay, Bradley Hodges, Aiden Teal, maybe. In terms of our arm talent, those are actually their best guys, but those are not the guys who have been in the middle of this whole thing. So to me, that's as impressive as anything else.
Yeah, no, and Hungate's from Abingdon, Virginia. So shout out Southwestern Virginia. I would have probably, if I would have mentioned him, it would have been wishful thinking, but it's like he's a funky arm slot guy. He's a make it work guy, which it feels like is perfectly emblematic of what this pitching staff has become to this point in the season. It's just like, you know what? It plays. That's Hungate's that way. Virginia's pitching is that way. And kind of similar to what I was talking about with North Carolina. You kind of you wait for it not to, and it continues to play. And they've gotten this far. So who were we to doubt it at this point?
Right. Well, I was really impressed in the regional round. Mississippi State can pitch, and especially you see Sanja, and for Virginia to beat him and to score enough offensively and then come back and win the next day. You're not going to see a whole lot of better pitching staffs than Mississippi State threw at them. So if they can hit them, I'm sold. I mean, you could hit anybody. Something you guys mentioned kind of struck me is Kentucky is kind of like you talked about with Virginia, is a team that everybody's kind of doubted all year. They got up to this tremendous start, and it's like, wait till they start playing better teams, right? Like the ones that they had been playing, who pretty much all made regionals were just terrible, right? So then they get there, and they continue to Tennessee, who ended up the number 1 team in the nation. I don't think we can really fault you there, and they continue to win, and it's been kind of. At the end of the series, after you finish Kentucky, you're thinking, how did we lose to this team? And they continue to do it week after week after week. And for me, it's one of those clubs. They're older. They understand how to play. They're aggressive. It's like basically the Sporting State where they saw home plate wasn't going to be covered, made the split decision, and McCarthy's in there, right? And it's those kinds of things that are the difference between winning and losing, and they seem to make them all, right? So if you're going to beat Kentucky, you've got to just bludgeon them. You've got to take it so it's not a close game late. And I think that's for NC State, and I watched them hit about 4,000 home runs Monday night against Georgia. They can do it, but that's the method to beat Kentucky, because if it's close, those guys are going to find a way.
I started to say when we were discussing UNC something about them playing within the margins and delivering, because I've described it with the Tar Heels that for most of the year, when they make a decision to send a runner or to put a hit and run on, or whatever the decision, it tends to work out. I think Kentucky is like that to the 10th degree. They just, what they do typically works when they decide to do it. And they're, again, another team that admittedly, Mark, I, for much of the season, didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Kentucky, because I was like, nah, they're not really going to matter by the time we get to Omaha, are they? They're not going to really matter down the stretch, are they?
Yeah, you can join the club. There's a few of it.
Yeah, and again, I just think that's them. They're solid across the board. They don't have the stars when we talk about Florida and Jack Caglione or Vance Honeycutt with North Carolina or any of the other numbers we've mentioned, a handful. But they're just a really good team. And they know how to win, clearly. I mean, obviously.
And they held Oregon State 3 hits over 2 games. I mean,
That
you
was
don't do
unbelievable.
that unless you can pitch it. I know they walked a bunch, but you don't do that unless you're really missing a lot of bats. So that's the piece to me that's fascinating, because I think they're going to score. I think they're going to find ways, and do some things aggressively to score. But are they going to pitch enough? And I did not expect them to do that to Oregon State. I don't think anybody did. And maybe the only team that thought they would do it is Kentucky themselves, and that's kind of their mantra. They just kind of think that they're the best team in the country, and they're getting a chance to prove it this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the thing all year with with Kentucky, is that I've said it a million times. The Highway to Hoover listeners are sick of hearing me say it, but I don't know that they're right, but Kentucky thinks they're the best team in the country. And honestly, if they think that now, like, nobody has the right to tell them they're wrong, because they're ranked number 2 in the country or whatever, and they're the number 2 national seed, and they're here, right? But they thought that back in like March, when everyone was still like, yeah, I don't know, like, they were good last year, are they good again? Like, or certainly before we knew they were this much better than they were last year. They've thought that from the beginning. And that, that can only take you so far, but it does get you far. Just that level, they always think they're going to figure it out. And most of the time they do. That's just the reality.
Yeah. And one thing I'll point out is, since we have a little bit different audiences, last year, Kentucky, they were less talented. They were less physical. They got by on a little more small ball. Yeah. This year, they can still do those things, but they're physical. I mean, they've got guys hit the ball out of the park, hit doubles. It's not just about putting pressure on you and doing those things we just discussed. I mean, they can, if you need to muscle up, they can do that. And I think that's what makes why this team, one, they didn't face LSU and Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz in the Super. I mean, let's be honest, that affects your postseason success. But this year, that's the difference in this team and last year's team is it's just they're more athletic, and they can beat you in different ways. And you need to be versatile, because you're going to run into some guys that, you're going to have to hit the ball out of the park to beat them, because you're not going to get many hits. And I think that's where this team has the advantage over what we saw with them last year.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, because again, like, when I talk about them being a team that just like wins on the margins, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're bunting winning runs across, but it means they can, and they're able if they need to, right? They build in strategies for when they need exactly one run. A lot of the times they don't, but they have that too. I'm curious, your guys' impressions, Mark. You started on NC State a little bit a moment ago. What's your guys' impression of NC State? I get it from the sort of closer to vest ACC heads, and I have my thoughts. But what do we think of them?
I really like the top of the lineup. I mean, they showed off this weekend, and granted, I don't know how they played in March, but they played really good in early June. I do think that the starters, for me, obviously their numbers aren't great. They pitch pretty good against a Georgia team that can swing it. Certainly, it has a lot of power. But the bullpen impressed me. Being able to come in with swing and miss stuff at the end of games. The difference in that game last night or Monday night was Georgia got men on base, and the NC State relievers were able to get strikeouts. And get out of it without anybody scoring. That was the difference, right? And NC State hit home runs. But Georgia all year has been able to come through in those situations. They have 20-something grand slams or something just phenomenal like that. So it's that, and NC State was able to prohibit that. I think that travels. If you got swing and miss stuff, you bring a guy into the game in a crucial situation, men on base against good hitters, and he's able to get Ks. I mean, if you can do that to Charlie Condon, you ain't scared, because there's nobody else that's going to be better than him. So they got to be feeling really freaking confident right now, and they're going to be able to go into somewhere that doesn't play as small as Foley Field and feel even more confident. So I'd like NC State. I'm not sure how to pick that one. Going against a Kentucky team that we just raved about as well. So really fired up for that one. But to kind of put a bow on this, NC State, if they continue the top of the lineup, if they continue to perform like they did against Georgia, and they battered Georgia pitching, and are able to do enough at the bottom of the lineup to get those first guys again, be on base when they come up, then sky's the limit. They can win the whole thing.
I think I'm interested in, I assume Sam Heifel will throw in that opener for NC State. I'm interested in that matchup because Kentucky thrives with situations where they can speed up the pitcher, either by ambushing them, which Ryan Waldschmidt has, I don't know how many leadoff home runs this year, a lot of them on first pitches, or by moving him around, making him field his position, taking a bunch of walks and getting, Sam Heifel's not going to speed up. He's a good athlete, so we can field his position.
Right.
But also, this dude stared down Vanderbilt in 2021. He's
like my age. Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This dude, not just stared down Vanderbilt, was on opposite Jack Leiter and outpitched him in Omaha. So you're not going to freak him out.
And had to hit and got a couple knocks off of Kumar
Right.
Rock.
Oh, yeah.
So
no big deal. No big deal. So yeah, I'm fascinated by that piece of it. I will also say what I'm really intrigued by with NC State is I think the additions of Alec Makarevich and Garrett Pennington in that lineup, two older kind of, I hate to use the word gritty, but just really solid, steady veterans who are not flashy, but are really good hitters like that. Those are perfect NC State players. And it seems like those additions really kind of gave this team a new dynamic, if you will. And you combine that with correct me if I'm wrong, Daron, but it feels like, yes, the pitching numbers are maybe not exactly where they'd like them to be, but this staff has more stuff than previous NC State staffs have had. That's my read on it. Because I've always thought of NC State's 89 to 92 sinker with a slider, and this is
they're all, and this is not disrespectful to a guy who without injury would be making this run with this team, but they're not all Matt Willitson. They're not all just guys who are throwers, right? And Willitson has done some phenomenal things in his career, just willing himself through outings. And that's not to say he wouldn't be great with this group too, but you're right. They brought in, especially you mentioned the bullpen, Mark, on the backside of the bullpen. They've got Jacob Duden and Derek Smith, two freshmen who, they're all stuff. That's what they are, stuff. Sam Heifel's stuff is as good as it's been his entire career. You talk about 2021. He set several career highs this season. And it was odd to say it in the moment, but it's oh yeah, that breaks his previous career high set in 2021, 3 years ago, right? It's just that it's not often you get that kind of a jump with a new career high, but he's been motivated. He had the lower back stuff that bothered him last year, but he's been Sam Heifel. And I think your point is well taken about the guys in the lineup. There has been a sort of a durability with this lineup, which is, I know, an interesting choice of words because they have some guys who are out literally injured and not durable. But it's in the way that the substitutions have come together. So Noah Souls has been banged up here and there and not had the kind of season that he has maybe wanted. But he's contributed in flashes, in big moments. The hits that he's gotten have felt big in most cases. Eli Serrano is somebody I've said all season long. His numbers, I don't know how his numbers are what they are, and he's as good as he is. He's still not even hitting 300. And that dude is a phenomenal hitter. Josh Hogue went down, and that was their leadoff hitter up to that point. And they just boosted Serrano to the top of the order, and he got better. You
can dream on him, man. He's got all the tools. It's all there for him if he finds the consistency.
Yeah, and speaking of consistency, we haven't even mentioned Jacob Cozart, who's right there in the middle of the lineup and like mashes. So yeah, like it's a really fun lineup, and it's a group that meshes really well. I know at one point they led the country in walk-off wins. So we talk about winning on the margins. I mean, if this is the team that could do it, remember Monaco had the call when they won it on an ESPN game late in the season. And I think they kept that lead in walk-off wins for the remainder of the year, although North Carolina might have them beat now.
They had a good week.
Yeah. So yeah, like it's a really, I told Elliot Avent earlier in the year, I was just like, man, I really like this group. You mentioned Makarevich coming over from East Carolina. That's literally the most experienced college baseball player in the country. He leads active players in games played. That matters this time of year. And if that's the guy who's going to be the driver in some cases, that's you feel good about that. So yeah, no, I think they're hitting in every category at the right time. Joe, you alluded to that bracket, that side of the bracket being kind of shaky or up for grabs even. Like, would it surprise me if we had NC State and Florida going at it for a spot in the final? Like that, that sounds pretty fun to me.
Yeah.
I may or may not have, we had to turn our picks in our picks thing with D1 baseball. I turned mine in yesterday, and I may or may not have NC State coming out of that side of the bracket. You'll have to stay tuned to our picks to see that, but I may have turned my back on the conference I covered to pick it, because I think that'd be cool too. Just like this NC State revenge tour in Omaha, which I don't.
Whatever would you write about?
Yeah, exactly. I also think there's a non-zero chance we get some incredible Elliot Avent sound at press conferences, because
his DGAF factor is really, really low.
Yes, it was already low. He's a guy who will tell you what he thinks. And also, this is a guy who knows like retirement's around the corner. I don't know when exactly, but like he's a guy who doesn't
he's
have
been saying it for years though. Like he's pulling the Charles Barkley. He's like, I could retire tomorrow. You know what I mean? He's been yanking us around. So every year I'm like, could this be it? Could this be it for Elliot? But in all seriousness, if they win the whole damn thing, he might just drop the mic.
Ride off into the sunset, right?
Yeah. Right off, flip some double birds
into the from the villains. Let me ride off and find a farm.
We tossed around. This is ACC chatter. We tossed around in the press box in Chapel Hill the other night the possibility of a North Carolina versus NC State College World Series finale.
Yeah.
And you could say the same thing for Florida State and Florida, just the cataclysmic impact that either of those.
I'll take either of those. I'll take either of them.
Yeah. And one fits our description of ACC versus SEC. So Noles and Gators sounds like a blast. That would be,
especially with the way Florida State handled Florida in 3 midweek games. I mean, they just drubbed them 3 times. And Florida's got to be thinking, well, we're better than we were then, and Florida State's like, sure you are. We are. Right.
Which, and funny when you consider that, like, historically, though, you go 15, 20 years back, like, Florida has handled that rivalry pretty well. Absolutely. So, like, interesting wrinkle there with this year being so different.
Yeah. All right, so I started to ask about a sleeper, but it sounds like we know Joe's.
Yep, nailed it.
Although at this point, there really aren't sleepers, right? It's just, basically, I would be asking you to pick somebody to win it all, not named Tennessee, Kentucky, or North Carolina. Is that fair? Like,
I think that's kind of where.
Yeah. Because I mean, A&M with their injuries, kind of normally they would be there, right?
Yeah, and I think coming into the field of 64, A&M was the team that I told a lot of people. I was just like, okay, I think to me they're the favorite. I think they would be tops for me. Limiting it to the 5 left. We've talked about like why we are compelled by all these teams. Give me Virginia. I just like, maybe it's because I started my season seeing them in a tournament setting in Jacksonville, and Joe, you were there too. they just pulled it out. I know them to be a program that can often pull it out. I don't know. Maybe Virginia's got it. But then again, I think about what Mike Fox said about Florida, and I'm just like, man, they're pretty good too. I really like A&M. There's a compelling case for all 8. So I don't even know that it is productive for us to pick one.
Right.
I would be. I mean, this is the first year in a while. I'd have to go back really and look, but to me, this is the first year in a while that at least I can think of that I wouldn't really be shocked by any of these 8 teams winning the whole thing.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a single one on the board that I'd be like, wow, didn't have any idea that could happen. I think there's a case. We could sit here and make a case for all 8 of them, and I think that's right. What's going to make it fun.
Yeah. I mean, and they're all seeded except for Florida, and Florida was number 2 in the preseason poll. They got dudes.
Yeah,
so
they got plenty of dudes.
Including one really, really big, large dude who hits the ball really hard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they is anyone going to be surprised if Florida figures it out and just continues this ascension?
No. I mean, because again, we're used to seeing them here by this point, so it's no surprise. Any final thoughts? That was fun. This is good. I like the crossover episode here.
Yeah. Super fun. My final thought is just that I would circle us back to the beginning, and that's if you're an SEC or ACC fan, really like feeling yourself about it just being these 2 conferences. Like, I get it. So I'm not saying don't feel that way, but just remember that, like, the Big 12 is getting better next year. The SEC is getting bigger, the ACC is getting bigger, and the margins are going to be thinner than ever. And so, like, you might be feeling yourself right now, but like things happen, life comes at you fast, as they say. So, it's one thing to have conference pride, and I get that, but the flip side of that, feeling really good about your conference is that your program could have a very different fate. Given the way these leagues are going. So it's kind of an interesting. I get the conference pride, but man, it just makes life really, really tough.
Well, when you have so many good teams in your own league, it makes it that much more challenging to get. We're able to play at home, and they won games at home, and I think that's a tremendous advantage. And the more hard teams you have to play, the more opportunities you have to lose. And that's certainly becoming even more. I mean, you have Stanford, Cal coming into the ACC, Oklahoma, Texas coming into the SEC. The schedules are just going to get more difficult, not less. So it'll be fascinating to see where this continues to go.
Even better than the Family Guy and The Simpsons melding for an episode.
That's right.
Or I don't know if you guys are BoJack Horseman fans, but I felt like Mr. Peanut Butter, because what is this, a crossover episode? Joe got it.
Yeah, that's good. Got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Boom. I like it.
Nothing,
I'll explain that to you later, Mark.
Nada.
That's okay. All right. Be sure, if you are not subscribed to Highway to Hoover, look, again, brand championing aside, we love college baseball. I am an ACC guy at my core. That's mostly what I cover. I listen to these guys every week. Yeah. So be sure you subscribe to both, show some love to both, because who knows, maybe next year, this time, we'll also have ACC and SEC teams in the College World. I mean, we will have, they'll be in there, just maybe joined by other conferences. But anyways, this was a lot of fun. Appreciate it, Joe and Mark. This has been the Highway to Hoover ACC Baseball Etc crossover College World Series preview. Let's get to Omaha. Everybody have a good week. Enjoy the games.